Well, hello there. I didn't see you come in. Make yourself at home. Have a drink. While I give some attention to some underappreciated characters and storylines that I personally love. And I hope you grow to love as well.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome back. Today we are reading Swamp Thing number 128, and just a little catch up on what's been going on. In the last issue, we saw the unveiling of Sunderland's new project, which is called Project Proteus, and that is a monster that eats toxic waste. And during its first test run, the Proteus monster is brought to an old toxic waste facility and is given all these barrels to eat. And at first it was just doing its job, eating the toxic waste. And then it noticed that it was outside and it decided that it wanted freedom. So the doctor that's running the test and a bunch of guards try to stop the monster from leaving. But that doesn't work, of course, because this thing is super strong and it also has a toxic touch that basically burns your skin immediately and then will burn you from the inside out. So the Proteus monster was able to escape the facility. We did see that Connie Sunderland, who was observing this whole experiment, was actually able to get away on her helicopter. But the head scientist in charge of the project overall was killed by the monster. So as the monster escapes the facility, it begins walking in nature. And of course, everywhere it walks is being corrupted by toxic waste. So the green begins to call out to its champion, Swamp Thing. And when we cut to him, we saw that he was doubled over in pain because of the amount of destruction this monster is doing to the green. And because he's in so much pain, and also because Lady Jane is telling him to, Swamp Thing decides to break his promise to Abby, where he said he would never leave her again. But to try to make it so he doesn't get in trouble for leaving her, he actually builds himself a double, one that looks exactly like him and talks exactly like him, so Abby will not know that he's gone. And that is where we stopped in the last issue with the exact moment that he created the doppelganger. So first things first, with issue 128, we got the cover here. We see that there is a giant Swamp Thing body that looks like it has fallen down on top of a bunch of different types of industry that pollute the earth. So we see behind him, there's a bunch of smokestacks spewing smoke into the air, and then sticking through his chest and his body are some oil derricks, and then through his legs and around his feet, we see some ocean oil derricks and also a whale that has been stabbed by a harpoon and is bleeding out. And Swamp Thing's body is definitely in decay. It looks like it's probably already dead, and the toxic waste from these facilities has killed him. And we also see on the cover that this is written by Nancy A. Collins with art by Scott Eaton and Kim DeMulder. And we start off on the first page inside of the green, where Swamp Thing is hurriedly heading towards Project Proteus and everything that is damaging on the earth. And he's thinking to himself, "Things are very different in the green. I have become so accustomed to traveling through it, using it as a means of transplanting my consciousness from one place to another, that I forget it's not merely a convenient highway." And we see surrounding him in the green, there's a bunch of different plant life coming through. So as he's moving, he's observing this other plant life. And he continues, "Every plant that grows, every form of vegetable life on the face of this earth is part of the green. It is a vast collective consciousness, not sentient yet self-aware. The green has a different agenda from that of mankind. Its timetable is measured in millennia, not hours or days. It is so tempting to slough off my material form and swim through the green, losing myself in its quiet, timeless world. Once I am inside the green, the struggle of humans to dominate the world around them, to turn nature to their will, is recognizable for the folly that it is. The green has endured drought, blight, fire, flood, and always continued, for that is the way of nature. The scales of prosperity and destruction kept in precarious balance. But now man is changing that balance, moving at speeds undreamt of a mere century before. Not even a blink of an eye as the green measures time. The green is being wounded at a prodigious rate, its integrity damaged with every passing year. The earth cries out and no one hears except me." And so finally he arrives at the area in the green where he sees the damage from the Proteus monster, and it actually looks like it's damaging the green as well, not just the plants on the surface, but actually the realm of the green. And his narration continues, "This is the locus of the call. This portion of the green is in great pain. What could possibly have inflicted such trauma? And then he begins to build a body for himself in the area that has been affected. And once his body is complete, something catches the corner of his eye and he turns his head to look and he sees the Proteus monster standing on top of some kind of toxic waste vessel and it's saying, "Hungry." And we see the name of this issue is Toxic Shock. Then we cut to the Sunderland Corporation headquarters in Washington, D.C., where Connie Sunderland is talking to her assistant on the phone while a bunch of other men wait next to her. And she says, "Smithers, I don't want to hear what you can't do about this situation. I want results. Is that understood? It's bad enough that we lost one of our best genetic researchers. I will not have the Sunderland name dragged through the papers. I want this Proteus miscarriage recaptured, and you better make sure the media remain unaware of its existence. The last thing I need is one of those professional snoops from the Washington Post or the Daily Planet sticking their nose into my business." And then she pauses for an answer, and we don't hear what that answer is, but we see that she is now like massaging her forehead like she's aggravated, and she replies, "No, it doesn't have to be taken alive. As far as I'm concerned, an autopsy will prove as useful as continued observation. Use whatever means are necessary to terminate the creature." And then she rolls her eyes with impatience as Smithers says something to her about Dr. Benwee and his death during the Proteus trial, and she replies in frustration, "Yes, Dr. Benwee was indeed a valuable member of our team." And then Smithers makes another suggestion, and she replies, "Yes, Smithers, I think a commemorative wreath would be a nice touch." And keep in mind, the whole time she's been talking, there's just been a bunch of people in suits standing in front of her, having to listen to this whole conversation, which I'm assuming was going on long before we actually jumped into it. So as she hangs up the phone, she looks at the people waiting and says, "Okay, which one of you has good news?" And one of the men speaks up saying, "We've just received a report that Proteus has been sighted breaching a toxic waste facility tank in Devil's Den, New Jersey." And then Connie gets very serious and stares at him angrily and says, "I asked for good news, you moron! I'm surrounded by fools and incompetents. If only my father was here, he'd show you a thing or two." But her insults are cut off as her phone begins to beep. So she goes over to it and answers, "Yes, what is it?" And the person on the speaker says aloud, "Dr. Polygon is here, Miss Sunderland." And she replies, "Show him in." And then she turns to the people in the suits waiting and she says, "Get out of my sight, the lot of you. You make me sick. I don't want to see any of you until you have something positive to relay to me. Understood?" And all the people that were in her office leave immediately. And as they're leaving the office, another man is walking in. He's an older white man who's wearing, I guess, like green khaki pants and then like a really weird looking jacket that's yellow. It looks weird because it seems like it's maybe a little too big for him. And it actually looks like the jacket a valet would wear for a hotel or a restaurant. The other thing that stands out besides the jacket is he's got a very large medallion hanging from his neck. So as he walks in, Connie says, "Dr. Polygon, it's a pleasure to finally meet you." And Dr. Polygon replies, "I see you've got a wonderful view of the Washington Monument here. Do you think it's strange that the monument is in the form of an obelisk, an ancient Egyptian structure, and that the picture of the Great Pyramid appears on the dollar bill opposite Washington's portrait?" And Connie doesn't reply to this at all, so Dr. Polygon walks over to a chair and sits down and continues. "Moreover, the decision to print the pyramid on the dollar bill was announced by the Secretary of Treasury on June 15th, 1935, both dates being multiples of 5. And are not there exactly 25 letters in the title of Secretary of the Treasury? Interesting, no?" And Connie, who looks very bored, says, "Not really. However, I found the comments concerning you by your fellow practitioners quite informative." And Dr. Polygon replies, "Who did you speak to? Dr. Fate? Baron Winters? Jason Blood?" And then Connie opens a file with Polygon's name on it, and she replies, "None of them seem to know who you are. However, one John Constantine of London, England, referred to you as, and I'm quoting here, a bloody wanker who'd mutilate his own mum's corpse if there was money in it. And Zatanna Zatara called you a mercenary sleazebag." And we get a close-up of Dr. Polygon as he begins to sweat, and he says, "Well, that is..." But then Connie cuts Dr. Polygon off, saying, "There's no need for you to feel embarrassed, Doctor. I have no doubt that you're the man for the job." And then she smiles slyly and asks, "Tell me, Dr. Polygon, what do you know about resurrecting the dead?" Then we cut back to Devil's Den, New Jersey, where we see the Proteus monster is tearing into more toxic waste pipes, and he's actually like taking a shower in multiple pipes that are just pouring waste on his body, and he's saying, "Hungry." And we see also in this panel that Swamp Thing is just staring and watching this happen from a distance, and then we get a close-up view of him looking dumbfounded as he thinks, "In the name of the founders, what is this?" And he looks on as Proteus begins to splash around in the toxic waste on the ground and yell excitedly, "Happy, happy." And Swamp Thing's thinking continues, "Whatever it is, it's contaminating the surrounding area, so I should start at the source." So Swamp Thing grows one of his arms into a bunch of vines that wraps around one of the main valves of the pipes leaking toxic waste, and he turns it and he shuts it off. And we see where Proteus is, the flow immediately stops, and Proteus looks at it and reaches out his hand trying to figure out what happened and says, "Huh?" And just as he does that, all of a sudden, a giant Swamp Thing fist comes out of nowhere and smashes Proteus in the face. And Swamp Thing is thinking, "I must move quickly. Simply being near so much toxic residue is painful for me." And Proteus is knocked down to the ground by Swamp Thing's blow, and as Swamp Thing stands above him, he asks Proteus, "Who are you? Why are you doing this?" And those questions from Swamp Thing actually trigger some memories in Proteus, and we get a memory flash from when he was still human, when he was being tested on by Dr. Binswee, and then another flash of him killing the rabbit that was given to him in the test facility. And over these memory flashes, we hear him say, "Who? Why?" And then it seems that these memories have infuriated Proteus because he's quickly able to get up and jump on top of Swamp Thing, making Swamp Thing fall to his knees. And as he does this, he yells out, "Yeah!" And Swamp Thing tries to block his attack with his forearm, but Proteus just bites down on it, and Proteus is actually able to get his hands around Swamp Thing's neck and face. And the second that Proteus touches Swamp Thing thinks, "He burns. At first I thought he was a deranged victim of an industrial accident, but whatever this creature may be, he is not human." Then we cut to Houma, Louisiana, and we see Abby is walking into JoJo's bar. And as JoJo sees her walk in, he says, "Hey, Abby, what's the matter, darling? Looks like you lost your best friend." And Abby sits at the bar and says, "You could say that, JoJo. Chester's moving to New Orleans in a couple weeks." And then JoJo says, "Huh? Peepers is leaving." And as JoJo serves her a beer, Abby says, "Chester's decided to finish his degree at Tulane University and try to become a teacher." And JoJo replies, "Wow." And Abby continues, "I know I should be happy for him. Chester's too worthwhile a man to be spending the rest of his life doing odd jobs, but still, things won't be the same without him." Then we cut to Terrebonne Parish, where we see Swamp Thing's house, and we see Tefe is sitting and drawing on some paper with some crayons, and next to her is sitting Swamp Thing's double. And we see Tefe kind of look over at the double, and then she goes over to him and taps him on the shoulder. And when we were introduced to the double at the end of the last issue, I wasn't sure whether Swamp Thing was actually going to be controlling it, like Swamp Thing can see what it sees and what Swamp Thing sees at the same time, but it doesn't seem like that's the way it is. It looks like Swamp Thing has given this double a consciousness completely of its own. So as Tefe taps it on the shoulder, it looks down at her, and as she sucks her thumb, she holds up the picture that she was drawing, and the double takes it in its hands, and it sees that it is a picture of Tefe, Abby, and Swamp Thing holding hands underneath the sunlight. And then we get a very ominous panel of the double looking up and smiling. And he's not creepy or anything, but this is definitely foreboding because it seems like he is very much enjoying living with this family and all the feelings he's having from it. Then we cut back to Devil's Den, New Jersey, where an Apache helicopter is heading towards the site that Proteus is at. And the pilot is saying, "Siegfried Valhalla, approaching the area where the target was last sighted." And the radio responds, "Make sure it's a clean kill. Brunhild doesn't want any more foul-ups on this one." And the pilot responds, "Roger that, Valhalla." And we see in the helicopter next to him is another soldier that is holding a rifle with a scope. Then we cut to the ground below them where Swamp Thing is fighting Proteus, and it is looking like Swamp Thing's finally getting the upper hand, except that his body is beginning to dissolve from the toxic touch of Proteus. But right now, Swamp Thing does have vines wrapped around Proteus, and it looks like Proteus is really struggling to break free of them. But Swamp Thing's inner thoughts say, "Burns. It burns." Then we get a panel that's from the sniper's point of view as he watches this fight occur through the gun scope. And the sniper says, "I've located the targets. It looks like there's someone down there with him. They're fighting." And the pilot responds, "Go ahead and shoot. Whoever's down there is a dead man already." So the sniper takes his shot and he gets a direct hit on the head of Proteus. But unfortunately, not only does the bullet go through Proteus's head, but it also comes out and hits Swamp Thing in the head as well. And then we get some pretty messed up panels where we see the effects of this bullet. We get a straight on view of Proteus as his skull has been exploded and you can see his brains and stuff inside. And as he falls to the ground dead, the last words he can say are, "Happy." And of course, that just leaves Swamp Thing standing here. And the bullet, of course, doesn't kill Swamp Thing because we know that bullets can't kill him. But he is surprised because he had no idea that that was going to happen. So he thinks to himself, "What?" But then he looks up and he sees the Apache attack helicopter flying off. And he thinks, "Of course, Sunderland. I should have known. No doubt this hapless monstrosity was an experiment gone awry. I will worry about Sunderland later. First, I must attend to the damage here by absorbing the toxins from the water table into myself." So he kneels down and he sticks his hands into the earth and they begin to root and go into the soil. And we've seen him do this before, like when he was down in Central America and he cleared the cornfields from the toxic fertilizer that was given to them by Sunderland. But it seems that this time the toxins in the ground are much more concentrated because the second that he begins to suck the toxins into his body, Swamp Thing thinks, "Pain. It feels as if my nerves have been scraped raw with rusty barbed wire and acid is being sluiced through my veins." And through this, there's definitely a lot of pain on his face and it looks like he's really trying to concentrate, and his thoughts continue. "The sense of self-preservation I inherited from Alec Holland is screaming at me, demanding that I stop." But he doesn't stop. He continues on because he knows he needs to clean all this toxic waste up, and his thoughts continue. "Not yet. A few more minutes." And as he's standing, we can actually see like his body begin to let off a bunch of different fumes as his body fills up with toxic waste. Then we cut to the evening, so there's been a time change, and we're in Terrebonne Parish inside of Swamp Thing's house, and we see that Abby is getting into bed with the doppelganger Swamp Thing. And she's saying to him, "Alec, I don't really know how I feel about Chester leaving. I realize I should be happy for him. I do think he's making the right decision. It's just I've gotten so used to having Chester around, being able to rely on him for help whenever I needed it. And since I've moved out to the swamps to be with you, he's the only human I've remained close to." And then she begins to tear up and she says, "Damn it, I know this sounds selfish, but what am I going to do when he's gone?" And the whole time she's been talking, we've been seeing this doppelganger just kind of lurching around her, not saying anything. And I think they're trying to make you feel like maybe it's going to hurt her or attack her, but it doesn't. It actually reaches out to her face and it wipes her tear away and it says, "Don't cry." And then Abby kind of chuckles and then hugs Swamp Thing saying, "Oh, Alec, you always know the right thing to say." Then they proceed to embrace even more, and the Swamp Thing doppelganger removes her shirt and she is naked underneath, and they proceed to begin making love. And I must say, it seems that the doppelganger is quite a skilled lover, because we get a cutaway shot of Lady Jane walking by their bedroom, and through the door, she hears Abby yell out, "Oh, Alec." Then we cut back to Devil's Den, New Jersey. I apologize for that, guys. I'm sorry. Look, I'm just reading it as it's written. So anyway, we're back at Devil's Den, and we see that the toxic waste seems to be cleaned up, but unfortunately, Swamp Thing's body does not look very good. There are a bunch of purple pustules that are growing all over his body, and he seems to be leaking fluid out as well, and he's thinking to himself as he walks through the woods, "Finished. I've healed this area as much as I can. All I have to do is dispose of this shell and travel back home through the green." And then he looks up at the moon and he thinks, "The next time I see the moon, it will be through a canopy of cypress and Spanish moss. All I need to do is think it, and I shall be back safe." So Swamp Thing closes his eyes and he begins to concentrate as he tries to leave his corrupted toxic body and go into the green. And the second that he tries that, all of a sudden he yells out, "Oh!" almost like he's hit a wall or something. And as he opens his eyes back up, he's still in the same body, and he thinks, I've been refused entry into the green. And then he falls to his knees and he holds his head saying, but that's impossible unless I have become so contaminated that my entering the green endangers its integrity. And then he struggles to his feet again and he begins to try to move forward, even though it seems like his body is really hurting because the toxic waste inside of him is really beginning to eat away at him. And his thoughts continue. I could force my way into the green. I have the power, but no, I would end up spreading my contagion throughout that realm. My duty is to defend the green, not endanger it. It looks like I have no choice but to make my way on foot until the toxins have been flushed from my system. But then Swamp Thing falls to the ground on his knees and he begins to vomit, and we see behind him there's actually like a trail everywhere he's stepping, and he thinks, I don't feel so good. Then we cut to Mediary, Louisiana the next day, and we've been here before. This is the house of Representative Barron, who was the Republican candidate for the governor race in Louisiana, and he was publicly insulted by Swamp Thing, and since then he has sworn vengeance on him. So we cut inside to Barron's office where he's sitting and he's calling someone on the phone. And just in case you forgot, there was a bunch of Nazi paraphernalia around his office, just to let you know that this guy is a real piece of work. He's even got a framed picture of Hitler on his desk. So as he makes his call, someone answers on the other line and he says, This is Representative Barron speaking. I'd like to report a case of child endangerment. By all accounts, the mother in question is highly unsuited to taking care of a child. She's believed to have been involved in the death of her husband, who is not the father's child, by the way. The baby was born out of wedlock 2 years ago, and the mother is engaged in an unnatural sexual relationship. Her name? It's Abigail Arcane Cable. There's no need to thank me, ma'am. I'm just doing my duty as a citizen. And as he says this last part, we see that he's looking at an old newspaper where we see there's a picture of Swamp Thing cutting the cheek of Barron with one of his vines from when Swamp Thing met the two gubernatorial candidates on the steps of the courthouse. And the headline above that picture says, Swamp Thing to Barron, stick it where the sun don't shine. So it seems Barron has called Child Protective Services on Swamp Thing and Abby to get back at Swamp Thing for embarrassing him in front of everybody that day. And with that, that is the end of the issue. So if you guys got any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planestrains.and-comic-books, all one word, @gmail.com. And remember, until next time, stay swampy.